I just got through writing the article version of this video and it hurts and my back hurts, so if you could go read that as well, just to make all of this worth it, I'd really appreciate that. This is a video of Japanese short story collections. I've read quite a few of them, and I love Japanese fiction in translation, and I increasingly love short stories as a medium more and more and more. I'm reading so many short story collections these days. I've mentioned a few in videos in the past, and I've got a bunch of articles about short story collections from around the world. Go check those out. Arabic short stories from Latin America, yeah, they're everywhere, and I love them. And so I'm going to talk about Japanese short story collections. These are pretty varied, and they are from most of my favourite Japanese authors and translators, so let's just fucking go. The thing that inspired me to make this video in the first place was this book. We were given a copy of this book. We were actually given 2 review copies of this book, and the second one is even signed by Kyoko Nakajima. Oh, the lighting's bad, sorry. Anyway, it's signed by Kyoko Nakajima, which is really cool. Kyoko Nakajima is an author who wrote a short novel called The Little House, and it's really good, and it won the Naoki Prize. And now we have this. This is Things Remembered and Things Forgotten. It is co-translated by Ian McCulloch MacDonald and Ginny Tapley Takimori. I love the translation of Ginny Tapley Takimori, she's awesome, and Ian McCulloch MacDonald, I've never read his translations before, but I have now, and they're really, really good. So there are 10 stories in here, and the 2 of them shared translation duties, and you can't really tell who translated what unless you actually look inside, because they both manage to capture the tone and essence of these stories so wonderfully. Kyoko Nakajima is a wonderful, wonderful writer, and what you have here are 10 stories about people, history, love, life, family. They are quite political, and they trace a line back and forth through the 20th century, from World War II to the present, looking at how modern Japan has grown and changed and the people have changed with it. It's a collection that is absolutely full of heart and love and beauty. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk through the first 2 or 3 stories from the collection so you can get an idea of what they're about. The first story is the titular Things Remembered and Things Forgotten, and it tells the story of a man who is retired. I think he's about in his 70s now, and him and his wife are on their way to visit his older brother who's in some sort of a care home. Can you hear that? It's a plane. And he has dementia. The story focuses most on our protagonist, the younger brother, telling his wife stories of his childhood with his big brother during the American occupation of Japan post-World War II. This story recounts the struggles and lives of these 2 boys and their mother and the people in their area, and there's actually a fantastic twist at the very end of this story that reminded me of Kazuo Ishiguro's A Pale View of Hills. It's a very similar kind of twist in terms of how it's executed and even what the twist consists of. It's a really charming story that moves between modern day and childhood in a post-World War II broken Japan. The second story won an award. I don't remember what the award was, I just remember reading that it was an award-winning story, and it's called When My Wife Was a Shiitake. Shiitake is a type of Japanese mushroom, as you know, because everyone knows that. And it's a really, really sweet story. Again, it's about a retired man who, pretty much the day that he retired, like the weekend that he retired, as he began his retirement, his wife suddenly died of like an aneurysm. Right after her death, like a week after her death, he finds out from his daughter that she had booked a special cooking class. And this cooking class was with a really famous chef. And she can no longer do the cooking class, being dead and everything. So he takes it. He doesn't want to. His daughter says, hey, it'd be a great idea if you took the cooking class, and people don't say no to this chef, okay? It's a one-on-one special cooking class. Mum wanted to do it. Please do it for her sake. And so he does. He takes the cooking class, but he also reads a diary that he finds of his wife. It's like a recipe book / diary about food that his wife had been writing for years and years. He finds it, he reads it, and he gets to know his recently deceased wife from a different angle. And it's so sweet. Most of the stories in this collection are bittersweet. They are laced with joy and sweetness, but also a lot of sorrow and not misery, but they're a little gloomy. but it's bittersweet, you know. They're charming and lovely, and it's kind of like this calming, soothing quality. The book is so lovely. As I say, it is about history, it is about lifelines, it is about our connections to other people. It is soothing and charming, and the translation is so meditative, and it's like a walk through a meadow. It's really lovely, and as you're walking through that meadow, you get all the different sights and smells, and it's so sweet, and I really enjoyed it. It was like a warm bowl of soup on a cold day. I really loved every story in this collection. I will go back to it and just read a few now and again whenever I'm feeling a little bit sad or lonely or whatever. It's really lovely. The next story I want to talk about is one that I have already talked about. I no longer have the book with me because I went to my parents' house a few weeks ago and I just dumped it there. Sorry, Dad. But I've talked about it already in another video. You can go watch that. There'll be a thing in the corner that you can click on. It's called Terminal Boredom by Izumi Suzuki. It's a collection of speculative science fiction stories. Izumi Suzuki was a fascinating feminist writer of 20th century Japan. She was a hostess, she was a model, she was an actress of very sexual films. I haven't seen them, but that's what I've read. And she was most famous for being this science fiction short story writer. And unfortunately, she killed herself shortly after writing the titular Terminal Boredom story of this collection. And so what we have are these, I think there's 10, if I remember rightly, 10 stories in this collection that are speculative science fiction. They take real world problems and issues and extrapolate them and turn them into something surreal and monstrous and scary, kind of like Black Mirror, kind of like all the great clever science fiction of our time. For example, there's a lot of stories that deal with overpopulation or pollution. They are twisted tales. One of my favorites was, I think it's the second or third story in the collection, which talks about cryogenically freezing people to try to deal with the population crisis. And it's from the perspective of a young woman who has a best friend who she doesn't really like, and the best friend opts to freeze herself. But when you freeze yourself, you can also have your consciousness taken out of your body and put into the brain of a friend or family member so that you get the best of both worlds, I guess. And she's like, oh, don't go into my brain, you're boring. It's funny and it's political and it deals with real world issues and it's bleak. You know, a lot of these stories are bleak and quite often funny. I laughed all the way through. It's dark comedy, black comedy. I loved it. I honestly loved it. They're punk, they're feminist, a lot of them, and they are angry at the state of the world, and in a very, you know, Franz Kafka, Albert Camus kind of way, they do laugh, because if you don't laugh, you'll cry. Okay, next I'm going to talk about two books by Yoko Ogawa. I have talked about these before. Again, I've done a whole video on Ogawa. She is one of my favorite Japanese writers. She's probably my favorite Japanese author. All of her books are translated by Stephen Snyder, who is an incredible translator, one of my favorites. There's a bird on the roof making a lot of noise. Oh my god, I can see it. There it is. Pigeon. Big wood pigeon. So I've got Revenge and I've got The Diving Pool. Revenge is a collection of, I think, 11 short stories that are all subtly interconnected. As you go, you start to notice a thread running through them. They are connected to one another in very interesting ways. They're all very dark, they're all very twisted, they're all very surreal. One of them is about a woman who, she goes to this bakery and every year she buys a cake for her son who actually died 12 years ago. Spooky, really good, really paranoia-y. I really like it. I can't remember the others. Oh, there's one I remember because Jess, my partner, she read this collection before I did and then got me to read it as well. She sold it to me by telling me about The Sewing of the Heart, I think it's called, which is about a woman who contacts a seamstress to make her a bag to contain her own heart. Oh, yeah, these are creepy stories. They're really creepy and wonderful and thematically tense. The other Ogawa one isn't technically a short story collection, I guess. It's 3 novellas, all smushed together. So novella, short story, they're each about 50 pages long, so it's about 150 pages total. And again, I've talked about this one quite a lot. And again, I don't have it with me anymore because I dumped it at my parents' house. The Diving Pool, the titular Diving Pool, is the first of the 3 stories, and it follows a teenage girl whose parents run an orphanage. They're Christians, which is very uncommon in Japan, and they run this orphanage, and they foster one of the boys from the orphanage, and so he and the protagonist have kind of grown up together. They're both teenagers, and she's obsessed with him. She sneaks into the school gym every day and just watches him dive, and you get these really detailed descriptions of his body. She is obsessed with him, and as the story goes on, it gets darker and darker, and it expands beyond just her obsession with him, but also her relationship to the house and the other kids and the things that she does. And the second story, The Pregnancy Diary, oh man, that's a brilliant one, from the perspective of a woman whose sister is pregnant, and it's about her relationship to her sister's husband, and this future child, and it's subtly eerie, even though nothing eerie really happens. It's just kind of her examining the human body, seeing it as this monstrous and alien thing. And as someone who is very phobic of children and pregnancy and all these things, I don't like it, I totally related to this story. I really understood it, and I'm sorry if you have given birth or are pregnant or whatever, but I find it all and so the story really spoke to me. Yeah, it was great. I actually have this one on me. This is People from My Neighborhood. This is by Hiromi Kawakami. Hiromi Kawakami was the first Japanese author I ever remember reading in translation. I didn't start with Murakami, which I'm always very proud of. I started, I think, with her novel, Strange Weather in Tokyo. Anyway, this is a great, tiny little short story collection, and it's full of stories. These stories are usually 2 or 3 pages long, and it's about a neighborhood. If you've ever watched The League of Gentlemen by, what's his name, Reece Shearsmith? Yeah, League of Gentlemen. If you've seen that, then you'll kind of know what this is. It's about a small neighborhood full of really weird people, and the stories are all interconnected. You slowly piece together a very clear, vivid mental image of this neighborhood and the people in it. And every story focuses on, you start to notice, oh, this person was the protagonist in that story, and now they've popped up as an extra in this other story, and it's about one single neighborhood. The cover, actually, is a model of a neighborhood that was designed, and it's absolutely stunning. You can go on Granta's website, I think, and see how this was built and photographed, and it's really interesting. Oh, by the way, this was translated by Ted Goosen, who I don't think I've ever read his translations before, but it's really good. These are really surreal tales, and they're quite funny in places. The kind of surrealism that kind of shocks you and go, what is happening here? Because what I found so interesting is that it's what people are like. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood for a certain amount of time, everyone, judges each other or has weird tendencies, and you tend to think that other people's ordinary behavior is bizarre from your perspective, or they think you're bizarre. It's kind of like that Tom Waits song, What's He Building? Where a neighbor is just nosy and thinks that another neighbor is weird, even though they're not doing anything weird, but they've built a story in their head about their strangeness. It's kind of like that. So if you take that Tom Waits song, mix it with League of Gentlemen, then you get People from My Neighborhood. It's really good. Another one I want to talk about is Where the Wild Ladies Are by Aoko Matsuda. It's translated by Polly Barton. You probably know by now, if you've watched a bunch of my videos, that I'm a big fan of Polly Barton. I've talked about her book 50 Sounds. You can check out that video. And I have mentioned her as a translator a bunch of times because she translates really good Japanese fiction. And Where the Wild Ladies Are is a wonderful collection of stories that are all inspired by folk tales and ghost tales of Japanese folklore. Aoko Matsuda takes these stories and she puts them in a modern setting. Some of them are queer, some of them are romantic. They are political in the sense that they deal with social issues or economic issues in some way, about work culture, work-life balance, the salaryman culture of Japan. And again, queer love, these things are very topical, but they are all actual ghost stories from Japanese history that have been made modern and relevant in today's Tokyo. They're really good stories. Some of them will stick in your head more than others, but they are all really delicious ghost stories. They're not scary. They attach themselves to the entire range of the emotional spectrum. Some of them will make you angry or frustrated. Some of them will make you feel jealous of the situation or just mesmerized by it and taken in by the strangeness of it. It's published by Tilted Axis, and Tilted Axis Press always put out strange, experimental, exciting works in translation. Go support Tilted Axis Press. Brilliant. One that I feel obligated to mention, even though I didn't really love it, was Men Without Women by Haruki Murakami. I liked some of the stories. There are 7, I think, stories in this collection. I remember really liking 2 or 3 of them. But what's interesting is I remember reading this last summer. I was in London, locked down, and I read this collection, and it was nice. It was a nice time. But I can't remember a single story in it now. In my article, I think I might have written about this in a little bit more detail, but my fingers hurt and I'm hungry, so I can't really remember. But, if you're a Murakami fan, you've probably already read it. His stuff is always reliably good. I've done videos on Murakami. I've done articles on him. I like him. I don't love him as much as I used to, but his stories are reliably good, and Men Without Women is a good time. And I can remember one of them hitting me really hard at the time, and now I just can't remember what they were. But anyway, Men Without Women, translated by Philip Gabriel, I think. Good stuff. Alright stuff. Junji Ito, I need to do a video at some point on Junji Ito. I am a colossal Junji Ito fan. I have read a lot of his stuff. You probably know Junji Ito is one of the big names in Japanese manga, Japanese comic books. He's huge, and quite rightly so. Nobody is as scary as Junji Ito. I just did a video on Stephen King. I read Misery, and it was scary, but nothing that King has ever written that I've read personally has matched the terror and utter discomfort and fright and eeriness and strangeness, spine-chilling terror of Junji Ito. Junji Ito is the master of horror, and Shiver is a collection of his short stories. Shiver is the best thing you can read. If you've never read Junji Ito, read Shiver. It is a collection of unique and disconnected short stories, and they are absolutely horrifying. The best and scariest of them is called Hanging Balloons, which is a story that I think about probably every single day. It is a story where suddenly giant balloons start flooding into Japan, and these balloons each have the face of a real person, and each balloon starts hunting its real life counterpart, and hanging from the bottom of the balloon is a noose. And so your balloon hunts you down, attaches its noose around your neck, hangs you, and then just floats about with your body hanging from it. That's the story. It's horrifying. The faces on the balloons, because of the way balloons are, you know, they come down to a point with the, they're all stretched and contorted, but you can tell, you know, this is my balloon, it's coming for me. And they hunt you down until they get you. Oh, love that story. It's one of my favourite short stories ever. Please read Junji Ito, read Shiver. It's a masterpiece collection of short terror. Okay, that's 8, I think. I'm going to mention 2 more. One is The Book of Tokyo. The Book of Tokyo is part of a series of books that Comma Press does. Comma Press is another wonderful indie publisher. I promise I will do a video soon on my favourite indie publishers because I really need to do that. Comma Press are great, and they have this series of books that you can go get, which is called Reading the City, a city in short fiction, and they are short story collections that are all based around different cities all around the world. They've done the Book of Tehran, the Book of Cairo, the Book of Jakarta, the Book of Tokyo, which is what I'm going to talk about now. I've actually got a bunch of written reviews on our website of some of these. You can go read them. I really liked the Book of Cairo. That one was particularly good. And the Book of Tokyo. And they've done a bunch of UK cities. The Book of Sheffield, which was edited by Catherine Taylor, who's a writer that I'm a big fan of. Book of Birmingham. So yeah, go check out Comma Press's Cities series and their Refugee Tales. They've done 3 books of Refugee Tales. Good stuff. I reviewed Refugee Tales 3. You can go read my review. Brilliant stuff. Love Comma Press. The Book of Tokyo is a collection of stories about Tokyo from lots of different writers. Lots of different Japanese writers and lots of Japanese translators put their mark on this book, and it really is, it's so worth your time because it paints the city of Tokyo in so many different lights. However these writers see Tokyo, their version of Tokyo comes to life, so you see it from 100 different angles throughout this collection. They're dark, they're twisted, they're surreal, they're not, they're grounded, and they are bleak, and they are hopeful, and they are full of laughter and love and everything. Again, this is an emotional spectrum of a book because it's loads of different writers and translators all targeting one city. The Book of Shanghai as well. I love the Book of Shanghai. Please check out the Book of Shanghai. Oh, their books are so great. If I remember rightly, one of the stories is by Hiromi Kawakami. There's another one by Banana Yoshimoto, who is one of my favorite Japanese authors. And there are translators who worked on it like Ginny Tapley Takimori and Morgan Giles. Morgan Giles is one of the great Japanese to English translators. Check out anything she translates. Please read Tokyo Ueno Station. That book. Wow. Yeah, by Yumiri. Yeah, check that out. And the last one that I'm going to recommend is the Penguin Book of Japanese Short Stories. This is a really good collection of Japanese short stories to read if you've never read any Japanese short stories, because this book features the biggest names in Japanese literature. Yasunari Kawabata, Akutagawa, whose name the prize is named after. I think Banana Yoshimoto as well. I think she's in this collection. I think there's a Murakami story in here. He also wrote the introduction, and it was edited by one of his translators, Jay Rubin, who's really, really great. I don't know if he translated all the stories, but he's definitely the editor and compiler of this collection for Penguin. There's also a Yukio Mishima story in here. You don't have to read that. You know, he was a fascist. Don't worry about it. But yeah, it's a really good collection because You've got Akutagawa and Kawabata and Murakami, so these are all the great giants of 20th century Japanese literature. These are Nobel Prize winners. These are very famous, very celebrated writers, so you're getting kind of the best of 20th century Japanese literature by reading this short story collection. So check it out, it's a great place to start a journey into Japanese literature. Alright, I will stop there because I do not know how long this video is going to end up being, but I know for a fact that I have missed out a ton. So tell me in the comments, please, what are your favorite Japanese short story collections? What are your favorite Japanese short stories? And who are your favorite Japanese writers? Because I've read a lot of them, definitely haven't read all of them, and I'd love it, especially if any of them have written short stories that I can read online, or collections, or featured in collections that I've missed out on. Tell me about your favorite Japanese literature. I'm always looking for more. And if you enjoyed this, subscribe for books.